This video is going to be a little bit longer than our normal videos because we're covering a very central concept to NVivo, which we get an enormous amount of inquiries about. And we do have videos for doing cases and classifications and understanding them and setting them up in various other videos for individual things like a Twitter feed or literature or interviews or focus groups or surveys. But most of them would have been recorded in older versions, so we're going to do this for all three in the new version of NVivo, which has been out since March of 2020. So it's referred to as NVivo 2020 and sometimes referred to as version R1. And it will look quite similar in both Windows and Mac. All the concepts we're going to talk about will be the same in Windows and Mac. And some of the steps in terms of the menus may be slightly different on the Mac, but we would have separate materials for doing this on a Mac. So the biggest single area of inquiry we get on our own website and on the QSR website, because we run courses for QSR as well, would be around cases and classifications and understanding them and then setting them up correctly for the different types of data that you want to work with. So this video is going to focus on setting up a project and inculcating into that a demonstration and hopefully imparting an understanding of the concept of cases and classifications, because they are a very important piece of infrastructure for many, probably from most studies. And we're going to do it for the three most common types of data that people set up, which would be focus groups, interviews and surveys. But what I'm showing you would also apply in equal measure with media files and other types of files like literature. And we do have videos for, accelerating your literature review with NVivo, conducting a thematic analysis in NVivo, visualizing your data in NVivo. But almost all of these separate tutorials all rely in the background on the same central concept of understanding and setting up cases correctly. So we're going to take a blank database and we're going to set it up using all three types of data, and hopefully in doing that explaining a bit more clearly for you at least what cases and classifications are and how they might work. So to do this, we're going to import the raw data. Now I've just set up, this is the standard tutorial, by the way. This data we're working with is the standard tutorial that comes with NVivo. So if you have the environmental changes project, the sample project that comes with NVivo, you'll have all this data. You can practice this. We'll also make any of these files, including the sample project, available on a download if anybody wants them. We can send you a link to download these materials, but they are actually already in the tutorial that you already have. They're just not exported. So imagine we're starting a project. We have interviews, we have focus groups, we have a survey, and we have demographics for our interviews, and indeed our focus groups. So I'm going to start off by just importing the files for my interviews. Actually, I'll do my focus group because that's the first on the list there. Now I'm just bringing in one of each. It's a multi-person interview. It's not really a focus group, but it's the same concept. It's more than one person being interviewed. So I'm dragging that in. You can see it's quite easy and quick to drag something in. And that's now imported. Now I'm going to go to my interviews folder. It's important in NVivo to click into the folder that you want to import into first before you hit the import button. You can also do this through the import files up here, and that would bring in text, media, audio, video, images, and PDFs. But you can also, as you've seen, you can also just drag them in from File Explorer. So there's my focus group in. I'm now going to go into my interviews and I'm going to bring those two in. And then we'll do the survey last, but I'll circle back to that. So with the one-to-one interviews, so the concept of the case is this. If you think of a case like being a unit of analysis and observation, if I was to use an academic phrase, it's an embedded case within your study of some kind. It doesn't have to be a person, but we're going to use a person as the example today because it's an obvious one and it's commonly used. And what we're trying to do with cases is connect the quantitative and the qualitative data together for that unit of analysis. So if it's an interview or a focus group, it's the words that you said. They go inside the case. linked to that in a table known in NVivo as a classification are all of the pieces of information of a quantitative nature that I want to link to the case. Gender, age, demographics, Likert scales if it's a survey, anything that's quantitative can get linked. I've now set up a relationship between what you said and who you are. And that gives you an identity in the database. Now, once I make my cases, I can forget about them. But the idea is that if I drag a piece of text from your interview to a theme, it knows what case that came from. Therefore, NVivo knows and can give you back aggregated information in your themes concerning demographic representation, voice representation, comparing research sites, or any information that may be recorded about the case. It could be what Likert scores you gave in answer to a particular question versus something that you said or a theme that you recorded against in the interviews. I can look at voice distribution. I can look at the weighting of gender, different groups across my themes and see where one group placed a greater emphasis on something than another, proportionate to the study population. We're not trying to be generalizable or statistically valid here. We're simply looking at the representation of voices and where one group may have placed a greater emphasis on something than another. And cases allow us to do that. So we're going to build cases and classifications now from our focus group and interviews. So I'll start with the focus group. It's a multi-person interview. So there's several people being interviewed in here. So if I open it up, you can see on the right hand side in detail view there, we've got the interviewer, we've got Maria, and we have Daniel as well. So we've more than one person, so technically it's a focus group. Now, I can't code the whole transcript because that represents 3 different people, because I want the interviewer to be a case as well. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to use another option. I'm going to do auto code. And I'm going to use the speaker name, because you can see from the focus group that the speakers have been tagged. They don't have to be tagged in any particular format, but their code, their ID, their pseudonym or their name must precede their comment. And that can be done in a tab or it can be done above the text. It doesn't have to be in bold or any particular style, but it does have to be identified. So I'm creating the speaker name now. I'm going to auto code. Now I have to put in the names of my individuals. So this is the interviewer. We have Maria. And I'm getting a little tick here when I tab across because it's showing me that it's found Maria's contributions. And we have Daniel. Now you'll see if I scroll down here that the different speakers are highlighted in different colors, so it's recognized each person's contribution. So I say next to that. Now it's asking me here to create a new classification because so far we haven't set one up. So and this classification, this table for the quantitative data is going to include demographics, but also the closed questions from my survey because they're also quantitative. I'm going to put them in the cases folder and it's now going to make those cases for me. It has now assigned the content of that focus group to 3 different cases. They exist now in my cases folder. You can see the interviewer, Daniel and Maria. The icon looks like a little case, surprisingly. And if I open up Maria, her case, you can see that it's only Maria's words that are contained within her case. That's not going to affect me when I'm coding thematically from the interview. If I go into the original interview, I see the original interview in its chronology. I can see whatever Maria was responding to, but her case only contains her words. And this means that if I want to run a search, people using words or phrases that the interviewer may also be using, I can ignore the interviewer and just get those words or phrases coming back to me if they're actually coming from a participant and not the interviewer. So that's my first set of cases set up, and they're now linked to this thing called a case classification. They're down in this area here on the left in navigation view, and if I double click on those, I can see the 3 cases. There's no demographics in there yet. We can enter these manually or we can import them. We're going to import them, but you could do it either way. We'll show you both ways. And that gives me, that will set up that relationship between what Daniel said and who Daniel is. But I also have my interviews. Now I could technically right click here and do create as cases. And that would give would code the entire document to a case, which technically could work, but that would also include the interviewer's words. And it would preclude me running those queries easily, certainly, where I only want to find the participants' words. So I'm going to do this the same way. Might take a couple of seconds longer, but I think it's worth it. So I'm going to do auto code instead of create as cases, again by speaker name. These are one-to-one interviews, so I already have the interviewer, and it's picked up the interviewer's words. And then there's Charles, because I can see here I'm in Charles's interview. I've selected them both, and now I switch over to Barbara. It's already found the interviewer for Barbara because it's the same person, so I just have to put Barbara's name in here and we're good to go. It doesn't take very long to do a whole batch of interviews. So I say next to that, and it's adding it now to the existing classification and putting these also into the same folder, because these are all people, regardless of whether they're coming from a survey, an interview, or a focus group, and that's what they all have in common. That's the unit of analysis, it's people. So now you see I've got the extra cases in here, and you'll see if I go down here that my interviewer now has 3 files in here because that person conducted all 3 interviews. But each individual only has their own words coded, and they're all linked to this classification. So my next step is to import the classifications. Now, just to show you, I could create these manually. If I wanted to make a new attribute, I could call it gender. I would have to assign what values I want to assign to gender. So male, female, non-binary, prefer not to say. I may have a range of values that I want to assign against gender, and they go in. So now I have a column here called gender, which I can now manually add values against the participants. And this is fully editable. I could decide I want to change gender to sex, so I can do that, and it does it, and you'll see the column here will change. But actually, it's much easier if I just import these, because I already have them in Excel. So many people would store their demographics as they go along, collecting data in the likes of Excel. So we'll go back out to our raw data, and we'll go into our demographics, and there's my demographics. Now the only thing I have to check if I'm going to import demographics is that the names of the cases are named the same with the spreadsheet, and they must be identical. If I've got Barbara _ interview here for the file, but Barbara with no underscore here, then that isn't going to match. It has to be an exact match. It wouldn't be the end of the world if I'd made a mistake with the naming being consistent, because that would happen quite a bit. All I would have to do in that case would be go to my cases, right click and do export list, and that will put a list of those case names straight into Excel, which would allow me copy and paste this column in, sort on the name, and then we'd be good to go. So once I have, and really it's not strictly speaking necessary, but probably better if what will become attributes in NVivo are all on the first row. They don't strictly speaking have to be, but they certainly have to be on the same row. And sometimes if you use a service like Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey, they're not always on the same row. But ours are, so we're ready to import this file. And it's a pretty straightforward wizard to import. So I'm going to go down here to my demographics, my case classifications. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to import the classification sheet. And I'm going to browse to my Excel file, which is on my desktop in the webinar raw data folder, demographics, and there it is. I'm going to say next to that. I'm going to leave these 3 boxes ticked, but just to explain, this is saying it's going to create new attributes if they don't exist, which I wanted to do because they don't at the moment. It's saying I already have my cases, so it's going to update these cases rather than make new ones. If I didn't, it would just default to making new ones. And I'm going to overwrite anything that's there. Now, there's nothing there at the moment, but as I said, this kind of information like surveys or demographics, you might be building them up as you collect your data, so you might want to periodically update this table and just overwrite the older one. So we're leaving those 3 options ticked. This is the only change I actually have to make in this wizard. Here it's asking me Do I want to, now that it knows I have the cases, where are they? So I'm telling it we're matching on the names and they're in the cases folder. If I had subfolders, I could point at the subfolders. And I'm leaving that box ticked as well. Create new cases if they don't exist. So if I have a mismatch, say I have a record in Excel that I don't have an interview for, or an interview that I don't have demographics for, I'm going to end up with a half of a case, either the qual inside and no demographics, or the other way around. So I know there's something missing and I can go and get it. So I don't have to make any change in this screen here. I hit finish and there's my data all in, all linked up. So that means I can now set a baseline. I can see, what age group or what gender values I have in my study. And I can set them as a baseline against my themes later on. When I have them coded, I can see the representation of those same groups. Are they over or underrepresented in different themes? And that's really the point of having cases. So my focus groups interviews are in. They're all integrated into as people, and we have people cases linked to this information, which is all described as classifications in NVivo. Now I have my survey. This is actually very easy to do because this used to be a 30-page tutorial when we had the screenshots and all that. So this is now a 3-page tutorial. So it's quite a straightforward process to import my survey. My survey will look like any other survey. Just show you what it looks like in its raw form. But this won't be a surprise to anyone what a survey looks like. So if I go into my webinar raw data, there's my survey. And there's the typical stuff. Some of these fields I may not want to bring in. Open and closed questions. So pretty standard tack. We're going to import that as well. So we'll move that off and we'll import survey from Excel. This could be, I'm using Excel in the example because it's the one that's most commonly used. This could be a text or CSV file, or it could be logging directly into Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey, although I recommend in most of these cases you jump into Excel first just to check that you don't need to do any cleaning up of the data before you import it. But you can do. So I'm going to come along here, I'm going to do it from Excel, and I'll go to my survey and I'll pick up my Excel file and I brought into this wizard. So what it's going to do here, so you see the concept is always the same, setting up cases, but the kind of data you're working with may not be. It's going to make each row into a case. It's going to attach all the closed questions. So the case, inside the case will have all that individual's responses to any open-ended question that they answered. The text, in other words. Linked to that will be the attributes. That will be all the closed questions, be it Likert scales or demographics or anything. And then it's going to auto code each open-ended response into a single code. So I can open up and see all the answers to question 1 or question 2, and I can code them thematically as well, still linked to their cases. So I'd say next to that. This is just asking me if I have more than one sheet. Do I want to, which sheet do I want to bring in? We only have the one in this example, so we can skip through that. I don't want it to make a separate set of folders for my survey. I may do on some occasions if there are completely different people, but actually I have common fields that are in the survey and in the interviews because, for example, we recorded sex against both of them. So if I wanted to run a query on sex, the simplest thing to do is to have a single classification and not two. So I'm going to change the location here. These are just people too, so I'm going to put them straight in to the people's folder. I don't want it to make a subfolder for my survey. This is correct. This is the first column, which is identifying the case ID. It's offering to make a new classification here, but again, I don't want to do that. I want to add that to the one I already have, so I'm just going to do that instead. This screen is quite important if you're doing this because NVivo will read each of the columns and try to ascertain whether it's an open or closed question based on the content. Now, almost always it gets it right, but not 100% of the time. So sometimes if you had say a closed question that very few people answered with a lot of blank cells, or where the answer was the value was quite long. It might think that was text and try to bring it in as an open question. Or if you had an open question that was, again, missing a lot of values, it might think it was a closed question. You know the way, for example, sometimes in a survey you might have 5 statements and you pick the one that's closest to it. That might look like text to NVivo. So it's checking here whether it's reading them correctly. And there may be some fields that you don't want to bring in at all, like the return date or the person's IP address or their email address. You may not want that information in there, so you might decide to leave that out. So you can change the value. If it's reading it incorrectly, you can change an open to a closed or a closed to an open question, because they are handled differently once you import them. So next to that, I'm not going to get into the auto coding by theme or sentiment, because that's a whole other webinar. So we'll skip through that bit, but we'll finish, and that will create, by complete automation, everything that I need to do in NVivo. So there's my survey in. It's no longer editable in here, by the way, so I need to make any changes and edits outside before I import it. Once I import it, the die is cast. Then I have all my open-ended responses. So there's the different responses. So you can see if I open up one of these, it's just text, but I could now start to create codes. Underneath these, if I wanted to initially break down each question or to a set of themes, or I might break down initially and then move them in, because you could have the same theme coming up under different questions. You might merge them into a common thematic framework as a second phase of analysis. But the point is that document is now ready for coding. But what's still linked to the case, it knows all the demographics and everything else. And then down here in my case classifications, I now have a much bigger table because it contains everything: my interviews, my focus groups, and my survey. Now obviously, so we asked people, for example, their age group in the interviews, but not in the survey. So they'll be unassigned. But then we asked everybody if they were involved in commercial phishing, regardless of the type of contribution they were making, the focus group, interview, or whatever. So that's common. Now I could run a query across my themes, or even just, taking commercial phishing now. Regardless of whether they're coming from an interview or focus group, they're going to be included now in this. So I can now see I have 86 people who are not involved in commercial and 22 who are. A 4-to-1 ratio roughly. And that's the representation that will be normal in my themes. But if I saw a theme that had a lot of people who are not involved, that might suggest, well, they're more concerned about this issue proportionately than the others. And that is now a fully integrated database that contains everything I need for my focus group, interview, or survey, all integrated into a single classification sheet and ready to go. So I hope that's helpful, just in giving you an idea of the concept of the case and why it's so important, because it's a game changer when it comes to analysis. So just to finish up, the concept of the case is, inside Barbara's case is what Barbara said, her words. Linked to that is who she is, her identity, her demographics or profiling information, or her Likert scales, or anything else that she's answered. Now, the confusing thing about a case is that a person isn't always a case. I could have a set of cases for my people. I could also have a set of cases for my literature. Because whereas I do want to track demographics across my themes, I also want to track demographics or say literature metadata across those very same themes. So the concept is the same. If I brought in a Twitter feed, the tweet could be the case. Inside the case would be the words the person tweeted, because the tweet is the unit of analysis, because each piece of metadata is different for each tweet. So inside the words would be the words that the person tweeted. Linked to that would be the date they posted it, the number of likes they got, etc. So whether it's people, literature, social media, or any type of data, you can have cases. And if you do, it's always automatable. There's never any work involved. You just have to understand them. You can do a lot more in terms of analysis. And actually having, you think about it, your standard qualitative project where you go out and you do interviews and you track demographics. Why do we capture demographics? We don't want them to end up as a purposeful sampling table at the back of our report. We want them so that we can code, filter, retrieve, and report on the inductively coded qualitative data. We're actually using this data to inform our analysis and our reporting. So I hope that's helpful. If you want the files, ping me an email. I'll stick the address up there at the end, and we can send you back a link to download any of those materials, but you should be able to do this with your own data anyway, hopefully. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.